for coming here. My name's Josh, and well, thank you. And I'm going to be talking about some lessons that we learned at ShapeShift DAO about DAOs and budgets and exactly how we spent money and how we cut spending in a DAO, much different than when you do it in a centralized organization. And I want to thank all the ETH Denver stewards and everything. This venue is awesome. For those who came in previous years, I think we're really in for an upgrade from the sports castle, although it had its own special kind of mystique. I think this is going to be really great this year. Can you all hear me all right? All good there? Okay, cool. So, all right, let's get going here. First is, why am I telling this story? And I'm just gonna... So, yeah, I've been in the tech startup scene here in Boulder, Denver for quite a while. I've had multiple leadership roles in tech startups. Started in ShapeShift and became the director of engineering there from 2018 to 2021. We were a centralized company. For those who have been around in crypto for a while, we had this really awesome minimally custodial exchange where you just input your address, send some Ethereum, get some Bitcoin out. And we then transitioned into a DAO in 2021. We'll go through into a little bit more detail on that. And then in the DAO, I was the first engineering workstream leader, a little bit more on exactly what is a workstream leader also. And now, since I left the engineering workstream leader, currently I'm on the ShapeShift DAO Tokenomics Committee, and I'm also a leadership coach, and I have lots of clients in crypto, Web3 startups, and quite a few that are working in DAOs. So I'm really happy to be sharing some of this information and detail with you. So last year at ETH Denver, I gave a talk called DAO Collaboration. And at that talk, I put up this statement that it's the collaborative power of individuals as equals that sets DAOs apart. So this was back in March, right? Same time last year in 2022. Although we were beyond the all-time highs of crypto, things were still riding pretty high. Who was here at ETH Denver last year? Just a quick show of hands. Okay, actually, there's a lot of people who weren't. That's awesome, and I guess we're expecting lots more people this year. So last year, for those who were here, the energy was still really high on crypto, even though the downtrend had already started. It didn't quite feel like it yet. We didn't have the UST collapse or any of the things that happened this year that really kind of set crypto back a little bit. So this was easier to be in a DAO and having this kind of individuals as equals when things were great. So I'm going to circle back to this at the end, and we'll see how we fared with this through the hard times when the going got rough. Okay, so collaborative power of individuals as equals. So I would argue that if you want to know where power is in an organization, you need to follow the money and see where the money trail goes. So let's take a little timeline travel through ShapeShift DAO's history, talking about how we spent money and then how we started needing to cut from that. So we're going to start with a timeline here. And in July of 2021, this is when ShapeShift DAO formed. The centralized organization was going to totally disband, lay off all employees. Well, we did do that. And we formed this DAO, and we transferred a lot of Fox tokens into the DAO treasury. So that's what ShapeShift DAO had to use to fund its operations, was a whole bunch of Fox tokens. No US dollars, no stable coins, just Fox tokens. And people started signing up or volunteering and coming around to spend some of these Fox tokens to contribute to the DAO and keep our mission going. So let's look a little bit at how did this spending happen. And to be able to look at how the spending happened in the DAO, I want to compare that to how spending happens in a centralized organization. So in a centralized organization, you have a bank account. And that bank account is usually gated by a board of directors who grants a lot of power traditionally to a CEO. And that CEO then creates a hierarchical structure underneath them that then spends the resources of the company, mostly money that's in the bank account, to be able to execute on its mission. Right? And there's a whole budget process where the CEO gets input, creates a budget, submits it to the board, gets it approved, and then money can flow. So compare this now to a DAO where there is no bank account in a DAO, right? What we have in a decentralized organization is a DAO treasury. And the DAO treasury then, or around the DAO treasury, are a bunch of governance token holders. In ShapeShift's case, this was the Fox token, right? Anyone who held at least one Fox token was a governance token holder. And any token holder can submit a proposal to the DAO to be able to spend money from it. And through a governance process, that proposal goes to vote. And if it's passed, if more people say yes than no, and there's a quorum of enough voters, then that money is then allocated to the person who submitted that proposal to spend it as they said they would. So, right, in a centralized organization, anybody can spend these funds, can submit a proposal. That's an important aspect, right? It's not a CEO submitting a budget to a board. Anybody can submit a proposal to the DAO to go to vote. So in a traditional centralized organization, you can see the money and the power flows down through the organization, whereas in a decentralized organization, you create more of a circle of individuals as equals. And one thing that's really relevant to this story is I'm seeing that the gray is not really showing up very well on the screen. Okay, that's good for me to know. One thing that's really relevant for this story is what it turns out that the people who are submitting most of the proposals, and certainly the highest dollar value of proposals, are workstream leaders. So what exactly is a workstream leader? I mentioned that I was the engineering workstream leader for a while there. So for that, we're just going to look really quickly at the ShapeShift DAO structure. So what we learned as we became a DAO is that even a decentralized organization needs some structure to be able to operate effectively. It's not just total anarchy and chaos. And frankly, when ShapeShift DAO first formed, that's kind of what we thought, and that's what we had. A lot of anarchy and chaos and just didn't really get anything done. So we developed this structure, and the structure basically was we created a bunch of work streams, and a work stream was created by submitting a proposal that includes a budget and to be able to hire contributors in that work stream. And so this is where workstream leaders formed, is they were the ones who submitted the budget, and then on a monthly pay cycle, all the funds went to them, and they were entrusted to then send the funds to the contributors of their work stream. And you can see, it's kind of, the work streams were a little bit analogous to a typical company department. I was the director of engineering at centralized ShapeShift. I was the first engineering workstream leader, right? There's definitely an analogy there. So now back to our timeline, where we have, we're in July, we have Fox in the treasury. People start submitting proposals to spend Fox. A couple work streams get created. Our moderation work stream is the first one to get created, then our product work stream. And we started to realize, right, we're paying people in Fox, but people have bills to pay, so they're taking the Fox and they're selling it immediately through Uniswap or any of those other decentralized exchanges that have a Fox liquidity pool. So in November, we formed, via another proposal and a vote, the Treasury Management and Diversification Committee. So what exactly is that? Well, it's that we lovingly refer to it as the TMDC. And this was a couple aspects, but one of the large mandates of the TMDC was to accrue stable coins in our treasury so we could pay people in USDC and prevent a lot of open market selling of Fox. And we did a lot of other things as well that I'm not going to go into. And happy to talk about that at some other time. Okay, so now we're back to, oh, that's right. How did we do that? How did the TMDC turn Fox into stable coins? Largely, it was through a number of these different bond protocols. There were some really innovative DeFi protocols on this screen here that ShapeShift DAO used specifically to be able to get some USDC into our treasury. And then the other thing was RARI loans. We put up a lot of Fox collateral, borrowed USDC off of that, and a little bit more on things to watch out for when you borrow from algorithmic lending protocols, particularly when markets get bad, can get kind of rough. All right, back to our timeline then. And all right, so as we go through, I want us now start to show how much USDC we have in our treasury, right, which is the amount of money that we can spend. And also, I'm going to track our monthly expenses here so you can watch how this kind of played out with some data as well. So in January, we start to really, thanks to one of our DAO contributors who kept a really great record of things, this data was pretty readily available starting in January of last year. And you can see we have a little bit in the treasury. We're spending quite a large amount of money. And this whole time we're running some of these bonds to be able to continue to fund operations and accrue more USDC in the treasury. February, we're spending more. March, right? This is, again, if you think about the market, things were still feeling really good. March is when ETH Denver was last year. So people are really getting along, spending is easy. Proposals are being submitted. People saying, yeah, let's spend money there, spend money there. Typical kind of heyday type spending. April, and then we get to May, and right, just to give some context on what was going on with the markets now at this time, right, in April, we had another kind of going back towards our highs, and so we're still spending a lot of money, but May is when that Terra UST collapses, and you can see the markets, the Fox token price, which depends on how much USDC we can get because we're using the Fox token to be able to accrue USDC, and ETH, the general markets are all on their way for some serious decline here. So back to our timeline, and I'm going to put the Fox token price down there just so you can kind of watch that as we're going along as well. So May, right, I talked about the Terra UST collapse, which really hit things hard and started, and most people I think would say that's really when the bear market really started, and we knew that we were going to be in for another crypto winter, not knowing how long, but still it was a challenge. And this also happened to be the height of the spending of ShapeShift DAO. That big number, 814K, included some back pay, so it's not quite that we spent that much in that month if you were on an accrual basis, but the cash left the treasury that much in that month. So as a result of this, spending so much and seeing this market downturn, we started to have a lot of discussions in the community. But here's what was interesting. A centralized organization would have some meetings, some people would be invited to some meetings and not others, and there would be like, all kinds of just stuff, mostly at the top, going on around budget cuts. In a DAO, these conversations were happening everywhere. They're happening on weekly governance calls, in our forum text channels, on Discord and voice channels and text, one-on-one conversations, team meetings, like it was all over the place. It was really interesting to see how this happened, and also that it was a lot harder to come to consensus on how to stop spending money than it was on how to come to consensus on how to spend more money. So yeah, it got a little tricky in here. And in June, workstream leaders started making some budget cuts. Some other things happened. The security workstream ended, so we cut some spending by completely cutting out a whole workstream. We started talking about, do we not need dedicated support? We passed a proposal so that people could get paid in partial Fox. You could choose part of your salary in USDC and part of it in Fox. And we had this nice initiative where we offered boosted Fox. So if you locked your Fox in a hedgy contract for 3 months, 6 months, or 9 months, you would get an extra bonus on top to be able to save some of the stable coins in the treasury. That was another method that we used. And then workstream leaders were making cuts in their workstream budgets. So this got really interesting as well. And I want to talk a little bit about this, about how did the workstream budget cuts go? So we had workstream leaders, and you can see these workstream leaders are pretty central and key throughout this whole process here. So workstream leaders were having discussions with other workstream leaders. I talked about all these community discussions going on, and looking at the world and market conditions. They would then, as a workstream leader, ultimately make a decision to cut a contributor or a set of contributors, or however that might be. Tell them basically, you are now laid off. I'm not going to pay you from the workstream budget anymore. And then after that fact, they would include that reduction in cost in the next budget cycle. So we were in, at this point, a 3-month budget cycle, right? Budgets were submitted for renewal every 3 months, might have been 4. But some of these cuts all these cuts were being made before the next budget was being submitted to the community to vote, right? And so this was all going along until we had this very interesting case where on the engineering work stream, this happened. The work stream leader made some decisions just like all the other work stream leaders, or most of them had done, had some calls with some of the contributors and said, I'm not going to be able to pay you anymore. And those engineering contributors actually said, you don't have the authority to fire me. I'm going to keep working for the DAO and keep getting paid. And everyone was like, huh? Like, I mean, could you imagine that happening in a centralized company? It's impossible. So it started this whole series of debates, right? It talked about how we had a lot of conversations in all these different channels. And a bunch of us, including me, looked back through all of our previous governance proposals, our governance process, and indeed, there was nothing, the budgets that workstream leaders were getting passed, submitting and were getting voted for, were for specific periods of time, a specific amount of money to hire a specific amount of people. And there was nothing that granted workstream leaders the authority to change that budget allocation mid-cycle, right before another budget was passed. So it basically, everyone determined the workstream contributors are right. They're going to continue to get paid. They're going to continue to work. The workstream leader does not have the authority to fire them in the middle of a cycle. So what happened then is when you get into July, we have a couple things. First is we decided we needed a more explicit definition of the authority of a workstream leader, and that included the ability for that leader to make budget changes mid-cycle, at least reduction. They couldn't spend more. They only had it was like a ceiling of approval, but there was no floor for what they had to spend. And along with that, you can see a whole bunch of work streams cut their budgets, reduced expenses in these couple months here. And you can see that the numbers here start to go down, right? How much we're spending. And as we go along, right, through August, we're spending less. September, right, the market's still doing bad. You can see our Fox token price is continuing to drop. and we're doing a good job starting to control these costs. We have some community members who are arguing against this, that's saying that if we thin ourselves out too much, we're not going to have anything left. And we had some really good discussions all the way through this whole process as we continued to go along and spend less and less money through the fall. And then we get to December, and we have our DAO retreat, right? So some of the workstream leaders, anyone was invited to it. I think we had most of the workstream leaders, quite a few contributors. I think maybe 22, 25 people or something were there. It was in Golden. And and these questions come up again with, hey, look at the markets. And the other thing that I want to point out here too is look at our US Treasury numbers, how it starts to dwindle here, right? It starts getting less and less. So there's concern about how much money we have in the Treasury, how much money we're spending every month. Typical startup questions. What's our runway? How are we going to get more revenue so that we can start making up for this difference in what we're spending and what we're earning every month? Really valid, useful questions about how we're going to overcome this. And some people arguing for we have to spend less, further reductions. One of the things that I want to point out here too is that you can see the numbers, the way that they change, even though we're continuing to sell bonds to be able to accrue USDC. I mentioned this RARI loan before. Just a little side note, these algorithmic lending protocols, when the market goes down and funders start pulling their money out of the supply side of the loan, what happened was that the interest rate was a formula that wound up going up and up and up because people who were supplying for the loan were pulling the supply out, and we had points where we were paying 120%, 130% interest on like $1 million loan. It was looking really bad to be able to stay in that. So we had to dedicate a lot of resources to closing that position, paying off that loan completely. And that's another factor into why we started accruing less into the Treasury. So all these factors together just brought a lot of concern to the DAO retreat in December. And then in January, we had another series of workstream leaders who decided, I think we need to cut more, spend less, and made more budget cuts from there. We're in the next budget cycle, made more reductions in their budgets. So we have probably at least half the amount of people working at ShapeShift DAO now than we did at ETH Denver last year. We're spending, you can see this, quite a bit less, at least half of what we've been spending every month. And the other thing that was interesting to note here too is in January, we decided to end the support work stream. If you remember, I mentioned back in June is when that discussion first started. Do we need a dedicated support team? I would, in my own personal opinion, in retrospect, I think that if we were a centralized company, I think that support would have ended back in June or July as a dedicated function, probably saving us a fair amount. I mean, not like a game-changing amount, but I think that's one place where we saw this consensus to be able to, or we need more input and discussions before we cut spending that impacted us in a negative way as opposed to being in a centralized organization. I'm sure there's probably some people who would disagree, but that's, I think, is an interesting note of how long it took for that to happen. So then we continue, right? We're almost at present day. You can see our spending reduces even further. And in March, we don't know where we're going to be at, but we're somewhere around the like $220,000 a month now spend rate. So that's kind of like a little history about how ShapeShift started, how we started spending money, the market conditions, things that changed, and how we started not spending as much money. So some of the lessons that we learned some lessons that I could say I learned that I've talked to others. And, I'm curious, and I think, is that Willie out there? Hey, Willie. All right. So, and I think we have a couple other people here from ShapeShift DAO. So, one of the lessons we learned is be clear about your governance process, right? This whole issue of like, what were the workstream leaders' authority and responsibility was really caused a lot of conflict, right? Those discussions to be able to resolve what happened in that episode were not fun, really not fun. At the same time, you're not going to be able to figure out too much ahead of time. So make sure you are keeping an open community that can talk. I mean, the one thing that I think was good is we talked openly about a lot of stuff. And I think that is how one of the reasons we got through it. And there were messes, right? There was cleanup to do, but by having an open and transparent communication among people, I think it really helped. And not trying to figure everything out up front. Harder, I've mentioned this before, harder to come to consensus around cutting costs than spending money. I'm sure if anybody lives with any kind of personal budget, has a partner or anything like that, right? It's great to talk about what you're going to spend money on. And when you start talking about what are you going to stop spending money on, it's a lot harder conversation. I think that really was true for a DAO as well. So yeah, I'm curious out of this story, if there's, I'm just like getting towards the end here, if there's anyone else notices anything, a lesson that you can glean from this or any questions that you might have, I'd love to hear that. And I'll open that up in 1 second. Back to this, the collaborative power of individuals as equals sets DAOs apart. So I think the one question, and this was really raised by a lot of people in our DAO community, is do the workstream leaders have too much power, right? Is it not equal? Is it not individuals as equal enough because the workstream leaders have too much power and authority? We as a community decided to give them more authority on the budget, but there were definitely a dissenting opinion that should not happen. And so I think that's kind of an open question that we need to consider. All right, so while we see if there's anything else that anybody out in the audience has to say or questions, I'm going to leave these things up. app.shapeshift.com is an awesome app. It's a great interface, web interface, where you can connect multiple wallets, MetaMask, XDeFi, Ledger through MetaMask, a ShapeShift native wallet. We support multiple chains. We got Ethereum, Bitcoin, Cosmos, Avalanche. I mean, we're really rocking on the multi-chain, multi-wallet, and then multi-protocol support, right? Where you can interface with multiple DeFi protocols all in one interface, one wallet. It's really an amazing product. One of our newest integrations is with Thorchain Savers. So for I think one of the coolest things on here, if you have Ethereum and you're wondering, you want to earn some yield with your Ethereum natively on the Ethereum chain using Thorchain Savers through the ShapeShift interface, I think I'm currently earning over 5% on the Ethereum that I have deposited in there. So, and then leadershipcoach.io, that's me. If you click that barcode, there's buttons all over the place to schedule 30 minutes. If anybody wants to chat one-on-one about this or anything around organizational leadership, engineering leadership, I'd welcome that. All right, Willie, would you add anything to this? And if there's any questions from the audience, whoever has a question, we have time until 4:30, so feel welcome to come on up. Hey there.
GM Josh, GM everybody. Josh, I thought you really nailed it, and it was really cool to speak transparently about what was like some really, really challenging discussions for the community. Those discussions are hard enough, like one-on-one, but having them in public as a community is really challenging. So I think a lot of DAOs kind of learned similar experiences during this bear market, where especially during the bull, it was like very easy to spend. Like you said, almost every proposal was getting approved. And then during the bear, we pretty quickly had to figure out how to cut costs, or otherwise we'd be out of runway, stablecoin runway now. So props to everyone that participated in those difficult discussions. And yeah, I guess one thing that I want to add that popped up when you were talking was around how do the workstream leaders have too much authority? And yeah, I think one thing that's important to keep in mind is that ultimately the community is on top. So even in ShapeShift DAO and workstream leaders are delegated authority by the community. The community also has the ability to revoke that authority. So ultimately, yeah, the DAO, some people, I've heard the myth that like DAOs must be flat. You can't have any kind of hierarchy in your DAO, or that's not a DAO whatsoever. And I always think ultimately DAOs can be designed however the community wants, right? They can be completely flat if that's what the community wants, or if the community wanted to put a CEO in top and give them all the power, like the community could do that. But as long as the community is still on top and has the ability to revoke that authority, it's still a DAO. So yeah, that's all I really wanted to add there. Yeah.
Thanks, man. Yeah. About what being delegated by the community? Oh, the work stream. Oh, yes. Good question. Yes. So the question is a good question. The work stream leaders, how long do they have that authority for? Thank you for asking that question. It's for the same amount of time as the budget cycle. So we're currently working in 4-month budget cycles. So if you vote for a certain proposal, that proposal like was from March 1st to March, April, May, June to July 1st, right? It's to elect the work stream leader for those 4 months and to give them the budget that's being requested in that proposal for those 4 months. Is that clear? Thank you for the question. Yes.
Thank you. Have you added any additional voting procedures or contingencies for emergency situations?
Have we added any voting procedures for contingencies and emergency situations? No, we we have not. Thank you for helping with the mic there. We have not. So and what we think covers it is the fact that the workstream leaders, while they have power over those budgets, can make very quick. That's one of the reasons why the community, the people in the community that did vote for that was so that we could respond rapidly in those kind of situations. But our governance process it's drawn out, right? It takes multiple weeks for a proposal to go through ideation, go to vote, have the voting period. So it's something to think about. If there was a vote that was needed to enact something really quickly, what would that be? Like, how would we do that? It's a good point that we have not covered, except for giving the workstream leaders this immediate action authority. Thanks for the question.
Just curious if you can talk about the types of things that you prioritize when you go through that process.
The question is like what type?
Integration-wise, functionality, whatever, like the types of things that you prioritize in terms of what you're going to work on.
So okay, so how do we prioritize the work? So when the product are in the same. Is it the same exact cycle as the budget cycle? We actually have a roadmap that gets proposed and is voted on by the community as far as like what features will be the next priorities that both the product team and the engineering, that the community wants the product team and the engineering team to work on. Now that process is very driven by the product team with a lot of collaboration from the engineering team. So and usually that goes to vote to the community, and there may be some discussion and there's some input beforehand, and maybe some small adjustments are made, but once it goes to vote, it's pretty well generally accepted. So I would say that the product team and the engineering team, they're getting feedback from a lot of other people in the DAO, and I think they're doing a good job of driving collaborative discussions such that by the time it gets submitted to the community to vote, there's pretty widespread support for that as it is. And then as far as like priorities for each work stream, again, here the work stream leaders have this autonomy that if for tooling and that stuff, if it's within their budget, they've got the authority and they set their like priorities for how their individual work stream does work. The work for the product and what we're going to release out to the world is ultimately voted on by the community. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
How's like the layoff going? Like, how did you handle it? It's like, are they like stick around to be part of community? Are they like pay out and so on?
Good question. Good question here. Like, how did the layoffs go? Right, when people were let go, we saw a mix. Most people understood them, and because there was so much conversation about budget cuts throughout the whole community, that when individuals were let go, they pretty much understood and knew that it was possible. So that was a nice thing. It didn't just come out of the blue. Some people still were surprised, even though there was a lot of other outside information to tell them that it might happen. And some of them stuck around for a while just as community. We did offer severance. I remember the first times we were doing this, we're like, well, we're a DAO. People know we have no like official employee policy. Do we offer severance? I'm really glad that we made it a policy that we offered severance to contributors who were let go. So I think they were treated pretty well in regards to like how centralized companies treat people when they get laid off. And then some of them stuck around and participated in the community for a little bit afterwards. Most of them actually have wind up just moving on completely and being peripherally involved. Thank you for the question.
Hey Josh, thanks for the presentation here. Philosophically speaking, right, like the way you guys approach the DAO is a way that a DAO can be structured, right? Do you think the Nash equilibrium of DAOs is essentially a democracy or government, a democratic government, where they have elected officials to make certain decisions, right? Like, how do you differentiate, I guess, a DAO from a government aside from like national boundaries or regional boundaries?
Yeah, that's a good question, right? Because it's voting. And Willie pointed this out that, right, different DAOs are DAOing it differently. How they're working. I do know of some DAOs that have a CEO, right? The matter of like, how decentralized are you? How autonomous are you? What is your organization structure? We're just in this really nascent experimental period figuring this out. What's the like, I don't know that there's an ultimate structure. I think that depending on the mission of the DAO will depend on what is the best structure. How much power should individuals have? Should it be more democratic, like where every dollar spent is voted on and not just one person is given approval to then spend from? I think all of that can really change, but I do think that voting is a key part of a DAO, that aspect is there. And what I think is really interesting that you talk about, is it like a government? The thing that I think really changes moves it away from a government is the fact that the voting and the economics are tied together through the governance token. Now, there's some DAOs I know that have actually created two tokens. One is a governance token and the other is the economic, the token that then drives or is a part of the economic engine. So that's, I guess you remove yourself from that, but like at ShapeShift DAO and many DAOs, your voting power is also the same driver of the economic engine that the DAO is creating. So what is that going to do to governments? I don't know. Thank you for the question. Anybody else? I think these are awesome questions. Oh, over here?
Hi, yeah, thank you. Just out of curiosity, what were the existing revenues? Why were they insufficient? And then, part of the question is like, you can cut costs, but there's also like raising costs. So what was like the revenue side and why was that insufficient?
Yeah, it's a good question. Our revenue was not very much. Our largest revenue stream was actually from our validators. We ran a couple validators in the Cosmos ecosystem. And I think at the height, they were bringing in over $100,000 a month in commission from the staking. But with the charts aren't up there, but all the every token, including the Cosmos ecosystem tokens, all price just dropped. So the revenue dropped quite a bit, and we also get revenue through affiliate fees through some of the protocols that you can interface with, and all of that use went down. So everything was driven inside of crypto, and so it all dropped. And did you have another question? Okay, thank you. All right, well, if there's no other questions, then I'll say thank you, everybody, for checking this out. And as I said, follow up with me at any point if you want, and I hope you have a great conference.